There are 8 species of bear alive in the world today. The American black bear, the Asiatic black bear, the brown bear, the giant panda, the polar bear, the sloth bear, the Andean spectacled bear, and the sun bear. They are found across the globe from North and South America to Europe, Asia, and the Arctic, but none is found in Africa. Polar bears and Kodiak bears, a subspecies of brown bears, are the 2 largest in the world, weighing in at 1,200 pounds and standing up to 10 feet tall on their hind legs. They are an impressive sight. In comparison, the smallest bear is the sun bear, found in Southeast Asia. These bears weigh less than 145 pounds and grow to a maximum length of 4 feet. Except for polar bears and the giant panda, bears are mostly omnivorous, as well as eating vegetation, fruit, and berries. They eat small mammals, birds, and reptiles, and some invertebrates. There is an abundance of both vegetation and prey animals for bears in Africa, not to mention a vast array of habitats that would suit many of the bear species. So why aren't there any bears currently living in Africa? Bears did once exist in Africa until relatively recently. The Atlas bear was found amongst the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. They looked like a slightly stocky version of the current-day American black bears, and their range was thought to have stretched from Morocco across to Libya. They were hunted extensively for sport by the Roman Empire. The Romans used them in their gladiator arenas, as well as to execute criminals. They were hunted to extinction in the late 1800s. These bears are the only known species that were exclusive to Africa. Fossil records have revealed a further 2 species of bear that once lived in Africa. Agriotherium and Andarctos were huge bear species that became extinct during the Pliocene. It is thought that they may have become extinct in Africa due to the changing climate and greater competition from apex predators. Except for Australia, bears are adapted to most other continents. Australia split from the main continent, Gondwana, 250 million years ago, resulting in the unique and distinctive wildlife found nowhere else on Earth. Africa, however, still remains attached to Asia, but there are no bears currently living there. Polar bears evolved from brown bears 200,000 years ago and spread north. Brown bears and black bears spread widely across Europe and Asia and crossed into North America via the Bering Land Bridge. From there, the bears could radiate southwards, crossing the Panama Land Bridge and evolving into the Andean bear. Whilst the Atlas bear inhabited the mountainous region in North Africa, it never spread further south. The Sahara Desert could have acted as a barrier to the species, preventing it from increasing its range. However, the fossil of the giant Agriotherium bears have been found in sub-Saharan Africa, but it is thought to have died out from the increased competition. Most bear species alive today are highly adaptable. Not only do grizzly bears eat a wide selection of food, but they can easily shift their feeding behavior to suit the changing environment around them. Spectacled bears inhabit a wide range of habitats from the rainforest, cloud forest, and dry forest to grasslands and coastal regions. Asiatic black bears and sun bears coexist in the wild. Their diets overlap, but they do not outcompete each other as their food sources are plentiful. Perhaps it is the lack of adaptations that prehistoric bears had, which made them ill-suited to Africa. Current-day bears originated from Europe. They have adapted to colder climates. Increased seasonality within Europe was selected for a larger size, which aided in predatory behavior and protection from carnivores and allowed the accumulation of large fat reserves to survive the harsh winters and dips in food sources. It could be that these adaptations that allowed the bears to thrive in Europe, Asia, and North America were not conducive to the hotter African climate. Polar bears overheat very easily. This is why they move with their notorious lumbering walk. They prefer to ambush their prey rather than chase it over long distances. Similarly, black bears and grizzly brown bears are also susceptible to heat stress. Recently, it has been discovered that both black bears and grizzlies, especially pregnant females, cool down by taking cold baths. They find pools of water and take a dip, dumping heat as they do so. They also lose heat through the underside of their paws. They have a lot of blood vessels in their paws and often lie on their backs, waving them in the air to release heat. Scientists believe that the adaptive behavior of these bears will likely stand them in good stead as global warming takes hold, increasing the temperatures bears are used to. Since bears originated in Europe before spreading east and west, their adaptations were well suited to the northern hemisphere. But what about the Andean Spectacled Bear? This species inhabits South America and the southern hemisphere. They are found in the hot jungles and the mountainous regions of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. They have adapted incredibly well in order to survive and thrive in this climate and habitat. The Andean bear is far smaller in size compared to some of the other bear species. This means that they produce less heat and are less prone to heat stress. They are also expert climbers and often climb to the very tops of trees to escape the stifling heat near the forest floor. In the wet season, there is a significant amount of rain in these forested regions, and the bears can be seen standing in the rain to cool off. Like their larger cousins, they enjoy dipping into the water in order to help regulate their body temperature. Pools of water are littered throughout the jungle, especially during the wet season. Although temperatures in South America can rival those found in sub-Saharan Africa, it seems the Andean bear adapted well to this climate. The two species of extinct bears found in sub-Saharan Africa, Agriotherium and Arctidus, however, perhaps didn't adapt so well. Fossils of these species showed them to be enormous bears. They were considerably larger than today's bears and perhaps struggled more with the heat. It has also been speculated that these giant bears living in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Europe, were in actual fact scavengers. Their skull and teeth structure were unlikely to support muscles used to catch and kill their prey. Furthermore, analysis of the fossilized bones revealed they ate a vast array of animal species. This is fitting with a scavenger rather than a hunter. Perhaps their enormous size enabled them to scare away other animals feeding on a carcass. Today's brown bears often watch and wait for wolves to bring down their prey and then run in, scaring them away and feasting on the carcass themselves. Often scavengers, however, don't get the choice of cuts of meat. Therefore, feeding a bear of such enormous size indicated that they needed to get additional nutrients from elsewhere. Their jaws suggest they were able to crunch bone. This would have enabled them to get at the highly nutritious bone marrow of a carcass. Although scavenging and consuming this bone marrow could provide enough nutrition for these immense beasts, the arrival of hyenas meant competition for the same meal was high. Better adapted for the hotter, drier climate than the bears, and with the ability to scavenge and even hunt in packs, hyenas had the upper hand. It seems that fierce competition for food and the hot climate may have led to the demise of Agriotherium and Arctidus in Africa. Furthermore, bears of European origin may not have been able to cross southwards of the Sahara Desert. The only bear to have lived solely in Africa, the Atlas bear, was hunted to extinction. It is increasingly important to conserve the species we have on this planet that we and so many other organisms call home, because once they're gone, they're gone.
There are 8 species of bear that live across the globe. However, Britain doesn't have any wild bears roaming its countryside. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, around 7,000 years ago, there were thought to be more than 13,000 brown bears in Britain. They fed on large mammals like deer, elk, and bison, as well as consuming berries and roots when prey was scarce. But as little as 1,000 years ago, all of the bears disappeared from the British Isles. So, what happened to Britain's bears? Where did they go? And will they ever come back? Britain used to be attached to mainland Europe via a land bridge. This meant that animals could traverse to and from Britain with ease. Whatever species were in mainland Europe, like the European brown bear, were also found within Britain. Today, there are around 18,000 brown bears across 22 different countries within Europe, excluding Russia. The largest population is in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. Inside Russia, there are thought to be over 100,000 brown bears, about 36,000 of which are in European Russia. But as the last ice age came to an end, the ice melted and the sea levels rose. The land bridge that was connecting continental Europe to Britain was soon buried beneath the sea, around 8,500 years ago. And those animals that were inhabiting Britain were now trapped on the island. They needed to adapt to the changes that were happening across Britain, otherwise they faced extinction. After the last ice age, the landscape and habitats changed throughout Britain, in part due to a changing and warmer climate, and in part due to human settlements. Forests came and went. Vast grasslands contracted in size and gave way to woodland. Native animals came under pressure. Those who had been well adapted to the cold of the Ice Age now struggled in Britain. This led to the population of bears dwindling. One of the large mammals that the bears fed on was the Pleistocene woodland bison, Bison scherdansaki. These bison began to die out. They lost their open grassland habitats to encroaching woodland and were hunted by humans. This species of bison also existed in mainland Europe. From fossil evidence and mass excavations by scientists, it has been concluded that this species of bison was the most heavily targeted animal by human hunters. They were used for their meat, bones, horns, and hide. They became extinct from Britain 6,000 years ago, and with them gone, the bears lost a valuable source of prey. But there were still deer that bears could hunt, and these provided food for other British species that have also gone extinct, such as the Eurasian lynx, thought to have been in Britain until the 17th century, and the wolf, which survived in Britain until 1760. With nowhere to escape due to Britain being sealed off from the rest of Europe, the remaining animals had to avoid human persecution to survive. Just like in other parts of the world, many large mammals died out in Britain after the last ice age. But those that did survive beyond that, like the brown bear, the bison, wolf, Eurasian lynx, and even Britain's moose, were sadly driven to extinction by humans. The expansion of human settlements, where woodlands were destroyed to make way for houses and farmland, restricted the wild animals' habitats. It is hard for scientists to determine exactly when the bears became extinct in Britain. Specimens of them remain relatively rare. Some have been found in caves, fens, and bogs, but they are patchy and many have not been dated yet. The specimens provide evidence of their existence from the very south of England to the north of Scotland, spanning the length of Britain. They were present from the Stone Age to post-medieval times, but with their woodlands chopped down for timber and the species feeling the pressure of being hunted, they started to become rare shortly after. As Britain entered Roman times, from AD 43 to AD 410, there is evidence of a greater number of bears in the region. However, this unusual spike in specimens from that era isn't thought to have been from a sudden boom in the population of bears, which would indicate that they were recovering from an all-time low. Instead, it is believed that it is from the large numbers of bears that were being imported from mainland Europe by the Romans. They brought over the bears to be used in entertainment, such as bear dancing and bear baiting. For this reason, it is difficult to say whether the bear specimens that scientists have uncovered in Britain are descendants of these imported bears, or are from the original British bears that once thrived in the wild. When the last wild bear died is not yet clear, but scientists are working hard to try to pinpoint a time frame. Although the wild bears of Britain became extinct, they were still imported into the country beyond Roman times. Bears were present in the Tower of London and continued to be imported into Britain until well into the 20th century. Just like they had been for the Romans, dancing bears were a common form of entertainment for the paying public. They have been symbolic throughout Britain for hundreds of years, appearing in coats of arms, being worshipped in Celtic mythology, and appearing widely as teddy bears for children. They were also widely used for their body parts, with bear grease still being sold in Britain in the early 20th century as a reputed treatment for hair loss. Although the British bears once roamed the island's wilderness, could they survive there now, or has the landscape changed too much? As with many locally extinct species, there is always the question of reintroducing the animals that were once native to a country. The term rewilding is popular in Britain at the moment. It is an attempt to reverse a damaged landscape and revert Britain's lost wilderness using more traditional methods. Some projects have involved bringing back some ancient wildlife to achieve this. A small population of European bison has been introduced to a small area in Britain to be used in natural woodland management. They debark the weaker trees which naturally fall and decompose on the forest floor. It is a more natural way to fall trees than using machinery, and the presence of the bison has a positive effect in other ways, such as providing natural fertilizer from their dung. If they do well there, then they could be introduced to other areas too, and maybe one day they will become a common sight across Britain's rural landscape once more. But reintroducing a potential predator like the brown bear into a place where there aren't any dangerous predators is a whole other situation. According to a survey, a quarter of Britons wanted to see brown bears reintroduced to British woodlands. However, unlike people who live in other parts of Europe or North America, Britons aren't used to sharing their countryside with bears. The British would need to understand the safety precautions needed when out hiking in the woods, as they haven't lived alongside bears for 6,000 years. People would need to be educated about the protocols when coming face to face with a deadly animal on a gentle Sunday afternoon stroll. Those who live in bear habitats would have to take certain precautions, such as storing their food and trash securely and closing windows and doors. Introducing bears would require a whole different mindset for Britons. It would also bring into question the use of guns, with people needing to defend themselves when in bear country, something no government is going to want to introduce into a firearm-free Britain. Although it would be exciting to see brown bears in Britain once more, it is probably not a sensible rewilding project for this modern era. However, there is a chance to see European brown bears in Britain, and not necessarily inside a zoo either. The UK's largest brown bear exhibit, called Bear Wood, has just 4 brown bears roaming a 7.5-acre woodland alongside wolves and lynxes. It is safely fenced off from the public, but allows people to step back in time to observe the woodland wildlife of medieval Britain.
There are 8 species of bears in total. They inhabit wide and varied habitats across the globe, but none is found in Australia. The wrongly named koala bear, unique to Australia, is not a bear at all, but is a marsupial like kangaroos and opossums. In fact, Australia has a unique mammalian fauna that doesn't include any land predators larger than the dingo. And even the dingo was an introduced species brought to Australia thousands of years ago. So why does Australia have such unique and fascinating wildlife? And why doesn't it have any bears? To answer this question, we need to travel back millions of years. Australia was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana. This huge landmass was formed 550 million years ago and included modern-day South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. It was one of 2 landmasses covering the Earth, the other being Laurasia. During the formation of Gondwana, complex life forms began to evolve, but they were primitive. Animals like segmented worms and jellyfish were dominating. But following this, the Cambrian explosion, which resulted from higher atmospheric oxygen levels and more nutrient-rich seas, allowed larger and more complex animals to evolve. These animals could freely move from one place to the next on these large land masses without any oceanic barriers. But as the great supercontinent began to break up, it became increasingly difficult for species to migrate from one landmass to another. Early mammals had evolved in the late Triassic period on Gondwana, but the first bears didn't appear on Earth until much later, and after this great landmass had broken up. Since Australia had already detached from Gondwana and floated off towards its current location, there was no way of bears migrating there. Australia became isolated and separated from other continents by vast oceans, which meant animals that evolved and developed on other continents couldn't reach its shores. There was a geographical line called the Wallace Line, which is a zoological boundary between Australia and Southeast Asia. Animals found to the west of the line are of Asian origin, and those to the east are Australian. Very few species have crossed over from Southeast Asia into Australia, despite the relatively short distance across the open seas. Whilst bears never made it into Australia, Australia has developed its own very unique fauna. Found nowhere else on Earth, over 90% of Australia's species are endemic to Australia. This amounts to over 7,000 vertebrate animals and over 20,000 plants. 2 of the world's 3 egg-laying mammals live in Australia. The duck-billed platypus, with its duck-like feet and bill attached to an otter-like body, and the echidna, a hedgehog-looking mammal, as well as these bizarre animals. Most of the world's marsupials are found in Australia. These include Tasmanian devils, kangaroos, koalas, wombats, wallabies, and bandicoots. Australia's unique fauna is largely due to its geographical history, as Gondwana broke apart. For some time, South America, Antarctica, and Australia remained connected. This allowed for the migration of species between the different regions. The connection between these 3 continents is how marsupials came to be in Australia. Evidence suggests that marsupials originated and evolved in South America. Those that remained in Australia as it broke away from Antarctica and South America then evolved in isolation from the rest of the world. So, why aren't there weird and wonderful animals like marsupials in South America? The answer is that there used to be. Opossums originated in South America and migrated northwards into North America, and other marsupial species that lived in South America became extinct due to competition from other animals. The great species interchange between North and South America resulted in a massive loss of unique species from South America, including most marsupials. Australian marsupials evolved into their many different forms, free from large land predators. Although predators were less of a problem in Australia, the climate could be unforgiving. Australia became drier about 15 million years ago, resulting in more uniquely adapted species. Marsupials developed many adaptations to help them survive in the often harsh climatic conditions. Kangaroos can have babies at different developmental stages simultaneously. A baby embryo can be developed whilst a second is growing in the mother's pouch, and she nurses a third on the ground. These incredible animals can also stop their lactation and reproduction when times are tough. Adaptations like these ensure the survival of as many offspring as possible. So, if bears weren't around on Gondwana, then when did they evolve? And where did they migrate to and from? The evolutionary history of today's bears can be traced back 40 million years. They evolved from a common ancestor that had characteristics of both dogs and bears. But the first recognizable bear-like mammal only evolved 20 million years ago. All living bear species are thought to have descended from the dawn bear, which populated Asia, and what was subtropical Europe 20 million years ago. This bear became extinct about 7 million years ago, when Europe became colder and drier, but its descendants lived on. Eurasian bears spread across Europe and Asia, before crossing into North and then South America, diversifying as they did so. Although their dog-like ancestors were quite small, bears have since evolved into the world's largest carnivorous land mammals. We know why bears never occupied Australia, but it is interesting to consider whether they could survive there. While some bear species live in hot climates such as the sun bear and the spectacled bear, most bears overheat very easily. Even polar bears that live in the frozen Arctic and endure temperatures as low as -50 degrees Celsius or -58 degrees Fahrenheit can overheat if they run over a significant distance. The likes of grizzly bears and black bears take regular dips in rivers and lakes to cool off. Their enormous size and thick fur make them vulnerable to heat exhaustion. When we think of Australia, we often think of the hot climate. There are certainly some locations where the average annual temperatures can regularly exceed 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In these places, the climate would likely be too hot for some bear species. But with such a vast landmass, Australia offers a range of climates and habitats. Rainfall is variable, and temperatures can be a lot cooler than the scorching deserts of Western Australia. Some regions like Tasmania, Canberra, and Queensland are cooler and receive snow fairly often. There are even several seasonal ski resorts in some locations. Woodlands, forests, and national parks are extensive and could provide the right sort of habitat for many bear species. There is an abundance of wildlife that can be considered prey for bears, as well as plentiful fruits and berries. Of course, introducing an apex predator into a vulnerable ecosystem would wreak havoc on the native wildlife there, because Australia has developed an isolation over millions of years. The flora and fauna are easily disrupted by invasive species. As a result, the Australian government is extremely strict about what comes into the country. Whilst it may be exciting to see a grizzly bear making its home in Australia's outback, it is equally exciting that this country is unique and has its own diverse and wonderful wildlife. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also leave a comment with what you would like to see in the following videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.